Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Makin Sense, South Africa's best news podcast and the Common Sense's flagship podcast. As always, I am joined by a panel of brilliant South Africans scattered around the world. Joining us from Germany, where he runs the Bremen Democracy Research Group, the Sage of Saxony, James Myburgh. Broadcasting from the last vestiges of the British Empire, the Director of Wealth of Audley Capital, the Wolf of Waterloo, Simon Lincoln Reeder. Hopping across the Atlantic to Washington, D.C., we are joined by the Director of the Yorktown Foundation for Freedom, the policy wonk of the Potomac, Richard Tren. And not joining us today from the Melrose, our Common Sense headquarters in Melrose Arch, Dr. Franz Rayner.
Yeah, about that one, if I may just interrupt, it's unacceptable. This is not a Swedish grammar school, so I think it's only fair that we issue a first warning for truancy to Dr. Greta Rayner. And well, another thing, okay, quickly, is that he's with those investment guys, okay? He must tell them that they must give us cash. Podcasts are where the big bucks are at the moment. This is where we're an opinion-based economy now. So he can atone by telling those guys that.
Yeah, well, I hope that he does at least some propaganda work on our behalf while he's away. But I think, Simon, after hijacking the reins, you might as well start us off because we've got some big news coming out of the UK. The Deputy Prime Minister has resigned. So can you tell us what's going on there, Simon?
Sure. Well, Angela Rayner resigned last week, arguably pressured to do so. But I think Angela Rayner is very interesting, and I'll give some context and background as to why. And then I'll put us in a position to understand what the consequences are. Angela Rayner is a high-achieving politician, and I make the distinction between success and achievement in politics. Success in politics is Lee Kuan Yew or Margaret Thatcher or Donald Trump, or from the left, someone like José Mujica of Uruguay, in that these people managed to drag the center toward themselves. Angela Rayner didn't do that, but she was born in a very poor family in England's north. She had her first child, I think, at the age of 16, but she got into the unions and proved so highly effective that Parliament, Westminster, became inevitable for her. And she was elected for the first time in 2015. Now, you come to 2019, she spent 4 years under Jeremy Corbyn. And we have another general election in 2019 on the 12th of December. And the Conservatives trounced Labour, if you can recall. This is Boris Johnson, an inheritance which they've squandered, by the way, but that's beside the point. There's a suspicion that because Angela Rayner at that point is a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, that she is going to leave when Keir Starmer comes in and chases out all these anti-Semitic forces. But that is not the case, because she might be a little bit luxury beliefs, but her blood is the north-south working class factory floor shop steward divide. That's where she is really good, and that's always formed a very important part of Labour. So she stays. Not only does she stay, but she gets appointed essentially deputy party leader. And she proves incredibly effective at rubbing the opposition, the Conservative nose in their own privilege. And it's something that they've never been able to counter properly. These people just don't know how to argue back when they're told that they are privileged toffs. And one of the more annoying features, and I think Richard will agree with me, is that these people have actually responded by moving to the left themselves, which is a gift for Rayner and co, because not only does it prompt more jeering from their supporters, but the Conservatives' own base is now alienated. So she goes through 2019 to 2024 being very effective in this role. Now, 2024 comes along, another general election, and she, representing that blue collar type profile in the UK, it's essential for Keir Starmer to appoint someone like that in his executive, because there's no other link to it. If you look around him, he's got human rights lawyers, he's got PPE graduates, he's got people who've worked in the civil service and never held a proper job in their lives. He needs that link. Okay? 2025, a year later. Now, Angela Rayner, just like the rest of us, funny enough, doesn't fancy paying taxes that much. Okay? But she doesn't have the access to the types of structuring components and the advisors like someone like Rishi Sunak and his wife do, okay? Because they put together structures that take a week of people from PwC to unravel. Excuse me. So what happens is that Angela Rayner decides she wants to buy a house in Brighton. Now, she goes through, and the Conservatives hear about this happening from their HQ, CCHQ, and they send their dogs out, and their dogs bring their media supporters, in this case, the Telegraph. Okay, they feel that something has gone wrong here in the transaction of buying this house, and sure enough, they feel that they discover that Angela Rayner has not paid enough stamp duty, which is essentially property tax, and it's a dreadful, dreadful tax. It shouldn't exist. It completely isolates people from. The cost is imposed upon the buyer, not the seller. George Osborne tried to reform it in 2011, and he's only made it worse. And on that point, quickly, if you gave me a choice between having Angela Rayner or George Osborne as my leader, I'd take Angela Rayner, because I prefer to be stabbed in the front and not the back. Okay, but the point here is that they discovered she hadn't paid the necessary full amount, and they leapt, and it exploded in the Telegraph, and it reached its nadir last week, where she had nowhere else to turn but to resign. Now, okay, fine, she's resigned and she's out. Let me draw your guys' attention to something else. I've got lying around here somewhere a rap sheet of indiscretions committed by the Conservative Party, the people who went after Angela Rayner, over the course of the last 8 years. It's 70 lines long. Most of it isn't safe for work, but let me just give you a vanilla example. There's this Conservative minister, this woman. She's in her 50s. She's recently divorced. This is a few years ago. And she discovers she's got the taste for younger men. Okay. Now, I quite frankly admire that in a woman, all right? But this is Parliament, okay? And what happens is that a new parliamentary aide starts working for her, and we call them special advisors here. And she takes one look at this handsome young chap with floppy hair, and she goes, I would like that guy to carry my briefcase home tonight.
I did not touch that woman.
So she goes and she propositions this dude, okay? And he's like, no, I'm gay. And he actually was gay, okay? And her response is, no, you're not. Doesn't matter. And so begins the process of sexual harassment, where this young gay guy is having to fend off his boss, essentially in Parliament, on our dime. Now, you guys tell me, has Angela Rayner done worse than that? But that's not the only thing. We know that these guys are up to tricks, and we know there's a lot of cocaine abuse in Parliament, because independent marine biological research company went and tested the eels in the Thames outside Parliament and found that they're all blitzed out of their heads, those poor creatures. Okay, so we've also got stories about charges of male rape. We've got the former chief whip having to resign because he made the move on an Italian waiter, and there's a whole lot of stuff here. So, the Conservatives now are doing a victory lap and saying, we got rid of Angela Rayner. Be quite careful. I don't see any statute of limitations on this rap sheet. So if you're gonna go after someone, in this context, it would be advisable that you dig two graves. Where does this leave Keir Starmer? Last week, I thought that the likelihood of an election would be the result of the markets humiliating him into one. But I think that these guys are going to humiliate themselves into. He's got a deputy leader contest coming up in the next few months. If he doesn't get a loyalist, he's in trouble. So we'll wait and see how that goes. But just on the point of, this has been a very bad week for British politics, not just Angela Rayner and Labour. On the weekend, we had the Reform Party conference, which is Nigel Farage's upstart. And my wife and I were staying in a hotel. I had to double my martini quota just to make it through the first 15 minutes of that conference. They got a mayor to come out and sing to the crowd. She's an aspiring singer. She couldn't qualify for the Eurovision Song Contest, so she thought the conference was an opportune moment to belt something out. And it was horrendous. And the next thing that happens is they get that that mental oncologist, Asim Malhotra. That guy really doesn't like me, by the way. We had a big falling out at a conference in South Africa, I think 2 years ago. Clive Eckstein, the former cricketer, had to intervene. But he comes on stage like a tech bro, okay, and casually throws in that he's been told the King Charles's cancer came from one of the vaccines. Now, you can have that discussion, okay? You can have that discussion about vaccine harms and so on. But you're speaking to a bunch of centre-right boomers who were the biggest supporters of the vaccine rollout, okay? So it just doesn't match up. And then finally, there was the Green Party the Green Party leader election last week, where they elected this guy called Zach Polanski, and the less said about him, the better. I mean, look, he's admitted it. He's the first eco-fascist to attend Parliament, and I'll come to him a bit later in Graham Linehan and free speech. But that's back to you, Gabriel.
Well, thank you, Simon, for trying your best to get us taken off air by the British authorities in the second week. I think we've just quadrupled our list of enemies here at Makin Sense. But I wanted to ask you. Sorry, Richard.
Go ahead, Gabriel. I'm going to jump in after you.
I wanted to ask you and just kind of pick your brain about this. So you said, Keir Starmer is in a lot of trouble, and there are a lot of, I think, people who think that, in fact, this was a great benefit to Keir Starmer losing Angela Rayner. And the reason why they think that is because apparently I've talked to people in and around the UK who are much more better informed than me, that Angela Rayner was more popular amongst the party members, the Labour Party members, the people who elect the leaders, essentially. She was more popular amongst the unions. You mentioned that she comes from a background as a union rep. I found out that apparently she used to work in a care home and was recruited from that care home to work as a union rep. So she really is a dyed-in-the-wool unionite. And then apparently as well, especially amongst the backbenchers, but the whole parliamentary caucus, she's more popular than Starmer. And so maybe this is a benefit to him because he loses an incredibly powerful rival that's, directly against him in Parliament. You don't seem to think that, in fact, it's a good thing for him here.
No, I don't. Just by sheer numbers alone. Keir Starmer appeals to North London. There's an entire country around that, okay? All of the people who are around him now appeal to North London sensibilities. And that is no way for a party leader from essentially with a very proud blue-collar history. And those are the people who admire Angela Rayner. Those are the people who support her. They don't support Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's got a very limited audience with his current strategy. These law firms, these academics, these the new creative classes, you could call them, that's his constituency. She has a much, much broader appeal, and people, just by virtue of her accent, feel more connected to her. So I don't think that this is good at all.
So if you don't mind me asking, why did she have to go in the first place?
Well, this is it. I mean, my point being that people have done a lot worse, but because of the fact that I suppose that you could say tangentially there's the pressure of the cost of living crisis where people are feeling very economically oppressed at the moment. And when they hear that a minister especially one from a working class background, has tried to outfox taxes, it's not a good message. Was she pressured by her? It's a question that I'm not really confident answering. The ethics chap that they pulled in, Laurie Magnus, found that she had breached the rules. She hadn't acted in utmost transparency. It is an interesting one. But to James, if she had stood back and gone, actually, I'm going to fight this. Who knows? Given the level of support she enjoys, she is wildly popular, and I think I should underwrite this. Yeah.
And can she come back at some point? I mean, once she sort of
she will
paid her price.
She will absolutely come back. She will. You only have to look at someone like, and I sent you the. Peter Mandelson, okay, he's been also in financial trouble before. I think today is a whole new set of trouble with Peter Mandelson. The British ambassador to America has been exposed as deeply embedded into the Epstein situation. But previously, with his financial troubles, he resigned and he came back, and he actually came back stronger than previously. So Angela Rayner, there's no doubt in my mind that she will return.
I think that something we've brushed over that is worth mentioning. How much tax did she actually avoid paying? What is she resigning over in like actual quantum?
Well, that was the equivalent of R1 million.
I mean, there's an interesting parallel here that not paying R1 million of tax leads you to having to resign as the deputy prime minister of the UK. And James, I think you are someone who knows far more than all of us about the kind of financial indiscretion that is rife within South African politics. I mean, if you had a R1 million scandal in South Africa, I think you'd probably be celebrated as one of our better politicians.
No, that's right. I mean, South Africa is just on another level, but that I think we can return to in a future discussion.
Yeah.
Simon, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Rayner resigns, but why the reshuffle? Why Lamy out as foreign secretary? And what's going on there? Did Starmer just sort of choose this as an opportunity to do a little bit of a shuffle? Lamy does not seem to have been in my mind, the most erudite or successful foreign secretary that Britain's ever had.
No, he clearly has not been able to. Importantly, he hasn't been able to express any sort of competence in dealing with the Palestine, Gaza, Israel situation to the satisfaction of his backbenchers. Will Yvette Cooper, who was she did a really bad job here in this portfolio, and now he's putting someone in, and now he's appointing her as foreign secretary. I don't get the logic either. But I do know that these people are at a I just I can't see much of a future in terms of how long the backbenchers are going to tolerate this sort of thing without someone there representing what they feel.
So you're saying Lamy wasn't sufficiently anti-Israel?
Yeah, he wasn't to the extent that his backbenchers expected him to be, and
okay.
they were very disappointed in how he has formed this friendship with J.D. Vance, the vice president of the US, and which is crazy because you need good relationships, but that's them. They're a completely different, which we could cover in another exercise.
Can I quickly suggest that if anybody wants to learn more about David Lamy, there's a great clip of him as on the Celebrity Mastermind show, which is a British TV show. It used to have it in South Africa too. And this clip of him getting every single question wrong wrong one after the other, including one question: who succeeded Henry VIII? And he thinks for a second and says Henry VII. It's glorious.
He also got one. He was said which Marie was the inventor of penicillin, and he went Antoinette, Marie Antoinette.
It's beautiful.
Well, I think that that's on that note, it's a good place to move to you, James, because you are going to tell us about a different kind of financial story, and you'll tell us about the history of South African political party funding and kind of give us some context on that before taking us through some of the recent changes that have been made to the political party funding laws.
Sure, they're sort of small developments, but I think it's worth commenting on because it's actually, you know, it's party funding has a major effect on our history that I think we have yet to be aware of. But just to give the sort of background is that, obviously in exile, the ANC was entirely funded by foreign powers. Its main supporters were the Soviet bloc, and then from the late 70s onwards, Sweden became an ever-increasing supporter. And then, with the fall of the collapse of Soviet communism, then Sweden, the Soviet bloc falls away. Sweden is Sweden and Norway. Then are the sort of two core organizational funders of the ANC. And at that stage, their organizational budget's about what was then $30 million a year. You can times that by 40 for the contemporary rand value, so that's about 1.2 billion rand a year from the two Nordic states. And then Mandela himself, he goes fundraiser every trip he makes. He tries to raise funds for the ANC. Does it quite successfully, but those are ad hoc donations, and so but he gets from someone like Suharto of Indonesia $10 million in hard cash. So the ANC, but the core funding is the Nordic states. The Nordic states tell the ANC then, look, when you become a democracy, this funding stops because we're supporting you, obviously, because South Africa's not a white minority state, but once a democratic context is coming, we're going to cut off this essentially sort of around 1 billion rand in contemporary values. And without that, the ANC as an organization is going to be without any money. So they then say, okay, what are we going to do? Well, we need to build up our own funding flows. And to do that, they set up something called the Barter Trust. And the Barter Trust then sets up the Tebe Investment Corporation. And that's going to be the funding vehicle for the ANC when the Nordics cut off funding. And it starts trying to get into various business deals. Even at that early stage, one of them was MTN. It wanted to share in MTN. That didn't work out, and the ANC interest came in via Jonik later on. That's where Ramaphosa comes in. And that's another story, but that's, I think, a big part of the fight with the United States is over MTN, which then later on goes into Iran and does business there, and that's the cause of a lot of our foreign policy issues, but that's another story. So the ANC, through the 90s, it remains almost totally foreign funded. But it's in 93 or so, it separates out its assets from the ANC as an organization. Its sort of assets, its capital is housed in the Barter Trust. The ANC as an organization just spends money. It doesn't have assets of its own. These are housed in the separate vehicle called the Barter Trust. Then later on, it sets up another sort of even more notorious trust is the Chancellor House Trust, which it sets up. And that then is positioned to profit from the mining charter. And then also later from those big Eskom contracts where Chancellor House gets its notoriety. It's cut into the Medupi deal and the Kusile deal. As a junior partner, it contributes nothing, but it's going to get a big share of those contracts. So the ANC's sort of funding is through its trusts, and there are other trusts. I think those are just the two we know about. It's I think the election campaign, certainly in '94, maybe later, is done through another trust, because the ANC as an organization is always running these large overdrafts, so it can't actually spend the money, funds on election campaigns, because if it did get money, the bank would say, well, thank you very much, that was needed to pay off the overdraft. So that's the sort of ANC in the past, very heavily reliant on overseas funding for its survival, but that it's separated out itself between the organisation, the ANC, and its trusts. So it's a sort of long story short. From about 98, the ANC starts, increasing. The state starts paying an increasing share of the ANC's sort of organisational budget, and because the ANC is a dominant party, it gets the bulk of state funding. So up until 2017, we have total secrecy about party funding, and then in 2017, I think there's a constitutional court case. Suddenly, the ANC sort of announces this abrupt about turn and says, "Look, we're going to have we'll have total transparency. You can only, one legal entity, one person can only donate 15 million rand and no more than that to a political, I think a year and then any donation above 100,000 rand has to be declared. So once you go over 100,000 rand as a donor, you've got no anonymity anymore. And everyone's sort of pleasantly surprised by this. I mean, this is still in the Zuma era, and it's like a new era of transparency. Isn't this wonderful? So by now we've, I think that the law went into effect about 5 years ago or something. So we've had 5 years of this sort of transparent funding system. A non-profit organization called My Vote Counts sort of did a lot of work around this, and then a couple of years ago, it launches a legal challenge, and it said no, there must be total transparency with party funding. So they went to court to try and get rid of this anonymity below 100,000. And I think they might have wanted to introduce the funding cap as well. But now we're in a position to review what the effect of that party funding law has been. And so My Vote Counts lost that case. And the second development is they've increased the limit from 15 million rand to 30 million rand, and anonymity from 100,000 rand to 200,000 rand. And then the third thing, which is I think what I want to talk about, is every year the IEC is obliged to produce a report on party funding every year, and that was released. And to its credit, My Vote Counts then did quite a good report on that, but the actual document is reviewable. So what we can see now from the effect of that bill is. The effect of that act is essentially these parties now, if you're in Parliament, you get a huge amount of state funding. So the ANC last year, for this last report, they got about 1.2 billion rand in state funding, either from a sort of overall fund, or from the legislatures also fund the parties, and the DA would have got the equivalent proportion of that. So if you're an organisation already embedded in the legislatures and in Parliament, you have a huge amount of you're getting a huge flow of funding to support you. If you're a party like Action SA who's trying to get into the system, you're at a huge disadvantage, because when you're trying to come in, a donor can only give you 15 million rand a year. That's the limit. And what also came out in that court case is just how expensive an election is. The DA, I think, said that they had spent just under 400 million rand on the last election. So it is very difficult to fund. It becomes very difficult to fund an election if individual donors are only allowed to give 15 million rand, and who can give that money? Well, it's not anyone with any sort of stake in the economy. You have to be very rich and very immune from political influence. These, if the ANC has, over 30 years built up so much influence over the economy, has so many levers over the economy, that if you're an active businessman, dependent on licenses or whatever, I think you'd be very reluctant to make a donation to a political party, because then you're suddenly in the spotlight. So it's very, very wealthy retired businessmen who donate, according above that 100,000 rand threshold. But you would say, okay, but at least we have transparency now about party funding. But then when you look at the report, the ANC, who's getting 1.2 billion rand a year, up until the last election in state funding, it barely declares any of its funding at all, because who are its big donors? It's the Barter Trust and the Chancellor House Trust. So what it's declaring is donations from its trusts to the organisation. You don't know where there's no disclosure of who donated to the Barter Trust or the Chancellor House Trust, or where they got their assets from. So in that regard, I don't know if those trusts also disperse money. You've got no idea of whom they're dispersing money to. So that's, in a sense, the ANC disclosing that it's donating money from one branch of the movement to another branch of the movement. So there's sort of zero transparency there either. And in fact, the law, I think, was set up with that in mind, because the people who the ANC people who pushed through the law knew very well how the ANC structured its finances, even if no one else did. And they made sure that the trusts of the ANC fell outside of the ambit of the Act. Then the other thing that comes out in that funding report is the ANC declares 400 million rand in what it classes as other income, which it says it doesn't have to disclose the source of. Now, that's essentially the ANC's election campaign, is that 400 million rand. But they've just said, well, we're not going to say how we got it. And it's not like that's investment income or interest from investment, because the year before, that other income wasn't there. It was, 28 million rand or something that could be explained through investments or the smaller kind of incomes. After all this talk about transparency and whatever, we don't actually know where the ANC gets its money from, and obviously the EFF and MK are also totally opaque about where their funds are coming from. So we have the Liberation Movement parties essentially, excusing themselves from the law, and then all the sort of good opposition parties, the law-abiding parties, have to dutifully report on where all their money is coming from. So I think the effect of that law has been to squeeze the sort of, the Democratic Alliance and Action SA and that kind of party, but has done very little to tell us anything about where the Liberation Movement parties are getting their funding, other than we now know that it's a huge amount of that is from the state.
James, as you're talking there, I'm thinking to myself, do you think, there's a lot of conversations that France and I have had talking about the kind of strategic genius of Jacob Zuma. And you mentioned that the kind of change in the political party funding that was meant to lead to so much transparency comes during the Zuma era. Do you think that this was a kind of brilliant tactical masterstroke in which he could see that the ANC was losing its support amongst the kind of business elite of South Africa, and that eventually a point would be reached in which the ANC would have no more support left there, but they wanted to make it as difficult as possible for the members of that elite to be able to shift their support behind any opposition party?
Well, they definitely drew up the drawbridge when it came to foreign funding. That huge billions of rand that went to the ANC in the early 90s. The ANC would have always was going to win the first election, but it was essentially powered into political dominance by this massive foreign funding. So very clearly they closed that. When it's not, they made sure it wasn't going to happen to them. That an opposition party was going to get billions of rand from overseas to challenge the ANC, which was, I think, sensible. I think obviously when they did that legislation, they knew how their trust system works. That the donations went into the trusts, and then the trusts would either transfer to the ANC as an organisation, or they would pay bills themselves. So that was done knowingly, that the trusts were outside of the Act, the ambit of the Act. And obviously we're in a one-party dominant. We've been in a one-party dominant state for 30 years. The ANC has captured the levers of power. So it's not afraid of investigation or prosecution for what it does. But if you're if you're the Democratic Alliance or an opposition party, you would be worried about the state sort of taking an interest if you start sort of breaking the law or whatever. And then obviously if you're in business, you're also scared of reprisals from the ANC. So as soon as the anonymity is taken away from you, you become worried that you don't want to donate anymore. So I think paradoxically it's sort of reduced the pool of donors, at least for the significant amounts, to a very narrow, the Oppenheimer family, Michael LaRue. So it's definitely had a severely squeezed. The Democratic Alliance in the 2019 election could spend 550 million rand on the election campaign. In this election, that was down to about, I think, 390 million rand. So that funding law reduced, and this was a campaign where they should have got more money, but because of the funding law, it was greatly reduced. The ANC, I think, had funding reduced, but I think that was for other reasons. But it still could spend 400 million rand without disclosing where it came from. And this My Vote Counts effort to bring in total transparency, because the DA gets a large proportion of its funding comes from small donors under the 100,000 rand threshold, and if you took away the anonymity of those small donors, you would have caused huge pain to the Democratic Alliance and to any sort of party which has a sort of broad-based sort of middle-class support, because obviously people are scared and they don't want to be harassed for donating to a party. So it's turned out to be quite a sort of it's probably complicated the life of the ANC a little bit to a certain degree. But I think it very cleverly squeezed the opposition and squeezed the ability of the opposition to challenge the ANC, and I think it's made it very, very difficult for anyone to come out from outside of the system and ever sort of do a sort of external challenge to the sort of ruling liberation movement parties.
James, can I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. Who
Sure.
is My Vote Counts? Who are they? Are they international or they're local?
They're the sort of typical lefty NGO. I think they get donor funding. They got quite a significant sum from
USA.
From the Millennium Trust, which is Michael LaRue's sort of funding vehicle. So in a way, he's funding a legal challenge to himself to limit the amount of money he can donate. They've now but the but I don't know why. And this is a point Action SA made is why are you pushing this? Why are you pushing for this total sort of transparency, which will and reduction of donor limits, which will harm the opposition parties. When you're not using the 5 million rand, your 5 million rand budget to challenge the EFF because for not disclosing where they're getting their money from, or the ANC, is being very opaque where they're getting their money. MK doesn't declare any donor money, but is clearly spending a lot of money. So why are you going after why are you pushing an agenda that harms the opposition, but leaving these liberation movement parties alone? But that's what the Action SA sort of said in there, is sort of, complained about in their court papers.
That's fascinating. And
James, can I ask a quick question? Do we overestimate the role of money in politics? I mean, so the ANC gets a lot more and it's hurting the opposition parties, but it doesn't seem to have helped them politically. And you see this certainly in the States where the Democrats always for example, the Biden, the Harris campaign, the Clinton campaign before that, vastly more resources, huge donations from wealthy billionaires, but they underperform because the message doesn't resonate. So I get how this can punish new and upcoming parties, but do we overestimate the role of money in politics? I guess is my question.
I think if you're enjoying this, if you sort of, if you're riding a wave, I don't think it probably matters all that much, but it's very hard to sustain that wave. And for that, you need organization and funding and whatever. So there was that Change Starts Now initiative, which got, I think about 35 million rand in funding from wealthy donors, but it went nowhere. So it's a combination of things, but I think without funds, in the medium to long term, it would hurt you. But obviously, if you're just a sort of contrived organization which doesn't connect to people, you're also not going to get unlikely to get anywhere without funding. But I mean, if you took the EFF, I mean, the EFF in its heyday and gave them 2 billion rand of additional funding a year, I think you would have driven them. That would have powered them, quite to get it quite a lot further. So it's obviously a sort of combination. It's not one or the other,
Yeah.
But
No, I get it. I think there's people complain about money in politics. I think there should be more money in politics. Actually, I think it's important. We should be. It's money is you're expressing yourself, and I think there should be more of it. I totally agree with you. There should be a level playing field.
But also, you can't be on your point. To your point, Richard, you recall that how do you describe Trump 2020 with that guy Brad Pascali? They've got cash, but they completely screwed it up. There's also the hand of just bad organization, bad execution. Not to James's point about the wave, misunderstanding where that's going, and so on. They had a lot of money. But I think Brad Pascali bought Ferraris and houses in Florida with it. So
yeah.
I just to add, I mean, I think that in the US, you can waste a lot of money on adverts and stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the money goes. I think what matters in South African politics is having people on the ground. And that's very expensive. You have so that's where it's important, especially maybe not in the short term if your campaign catches the mood of the country, and there's always the new party and everyone's very excited about the new party and they vote for there's a sort of disgruntled element in especially in the suburbs who perpetually dissatisfied, and every election they'll vote for someone else and you get that vote. But if for in the sort of medium to long term, you actually need sort of boots on the ground. You actually need a sort of apparatus to last, and that's very expensive. And that's where it's about 2 billion rand in party funding from the state goes to. That's what it finances.
So just James, you mentioned something at the end there that you haven't quite, I think, illuminated well enough, because I think it's something that no one in South Africa understands about our system. The state pays political parties every year. It's part of our budget that the state will pay the political parties directly, correct?
Yes, the parties get a huge amount of funding. So if you exercise financial discipline, which the DA does and the ANC does not, it seems, that will cover your costs. So where you need donor funding for is for the election campaign. And if you're the DA, then you save the donor money, and then over 5 years, and then you spend it at the election campaign. And if you are the ANC, you have to make an emergency plan to get, 400 million rand or 500 million rand to pay for the election. I note with the EFF, they borrowed 60 million rand. So I don't know if that was... So there are questions about, obviously, if you borrow money, who's the bank or who's the lender, who's the guarantor of that loan? And that's another aspect where there's no transparency either.
Fascinating. But I think
Yeah.
that...
So just to emphasize this, the sums are staggering. The amount that these parties are getting now from the state.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite mind-boggling. And does the ANC, from the maths you said, about 2 billion is allotted to parties in total, and of that, the ANC gets 1.2 billion, you said?
Well, it's sort of more or less proportional. So it's from the legislature, it's from the provincial legislatures, it's from Parliament. There's some other funding allocation which comes in on top of that. So of that, about 905 million was from the legislatures and Parliament, and then another sort of 300 million rand was from this other party funding, this party fund. So that was on when the ANC had about 58% share of the vote.
Okay.
So they're going to lose about a third of that funding, and that third is more or less just going to go to the MK party.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a laundry list of disasters that come attached with what happened to the ANC last year. That loss of 17% of the vote. It's every percentage is 4 of your best paying jobs in the organization. Every percentage is now, also a percentage of that massive pie that gets allotted to the political parties. I mean, it seems as though you cannot get to the end of what went wrong for the ANC going into 2024 and after 2024.
That's right, but it's a sort of splintering of the ANC into 3 different parties. Those 3 still get, will still be getting over 60% of the funding share.
Yeah, you mean, and just for anyone who's not clear, by that we mean the ANC, MK, and EFF, who still kind of represent the racial nationalist bloc within South Africa. So I think that about does an excellent job of covering the political party funding in South Africa. And so I think we should turn to you, Richard, because you are going to be telling us about our friends to the right of us who've gone a little bit wacky, the woke right. So can you tell us, maybe before we can talk about the woke right, we can talk what is wokeness and how do we get to this concept of a woke right from there?
Yeah, so I mean, we probably all have our own definition of what woke means. To me, it means that you are awakened to the oppression around you. You're woke. It sort of kind of emerges out of these postmodernist ideas of seeing systemic oppression everywhere. You see the world in terms of victims and oppressors, and if you're truly woke, you begin almost every sentence with "as a," and then you fill in the words here. Disabled, lesbian, Inuit, transgender person, and your identity on the woke left. It seems your identity lends you authority. And so you cling on to that identity because it's kind of like a shield against evidence and reason and truth, and it doesn't matter. You can use it almost as a cudgel, and in a very sort of blunt way to get your way. People talk about their own truths. My truth, rather than the truth, is a very sort of woke concept. And out of all this, this thought comes, post-colonial theory and queer theory and gender theory and critical race theory, and there's been a talk for a while in the States about the death of work, and not just in the States, but is woke over? And because it seems like the Black Lives Matter campaigns, other sort of gender-based, the trans movement are coming up to significant opposition. People are not buying it anymore, and it has revealed to be being quite harmful to ordinary people. So there's been a pushback. But I don't think woke is dead at all. But there is this, people have been noticing a rise of what they're calling the woke right. Something that a researcher, James Lindsay, who has been writing on wokeness and identity politics for a long time, submitted an article to a right-of-center political journal that was basically taking Marxist ideas and inserting sort of right-wing themes throughout it, and it got it accepted and approved. And he was using this as evidence to support his idea that there is now on the right people adopting these kind of strategies, these identitarian strategies from the right, using these kinds of strategies. And it does seem like there is something there. You're seeing increasing sort of identitarianism on the right, kind of disregard of the truth. So people putting up there's several examples. I mean, perhaps the Trump 2020 election, denying that he lost. There was this issue of people eating dogs in wherever it was in Missouri. That was put out there by J.D. Vance, that it doesn't matter whether something's true or not. We can use these things to advance our agenda. There is this sort of adopting of a victim and oppressor mentality. In a way, I kind of get it. For a long time, young white men have been told that because of their innate, just because of their innateness, their whiteness and their sex, that they are somehow, there's something wrong with them, that they're the cause of problems, that they even use the word toxic about these people. So I can kind of get that they're pushing back against this, and they're using that those strategies against their opponents. So I think let me just say that there is a pushback to this. There are serious thinkers. I'm thinking of Daniel McCarthy, who writes for Modern Age at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, has pushed back against this, saying that these classical liberals, people like James Lindsay, and I would call myself a classical liberal, they are misunderstanding this completely, and that what we're actually returning to is not woke right, but actual real conservatism. And let me say right now that I'm not a political philosopher, and I'm kind of on shaky ground here. And so I don't want to get too deep get too ahead of my skis and start annoying people who think I'm completely messing up political philosophy on the right. But I will say that there's something going on here, and it's worth investigating more. And I think it's incumbent on people like us. I think we all sort of share some basic values to push back on this. You're seeing coming out, certainly in the States, some ugliness in this. Tucker Carlson, who is, was a very, I think he had the #1 rated Fox News show, who was then fired a couple of years ago from Fox, and is, I think you could consider him to be part of the woke right, and delving into areas that are really quite troublesome, including sort of outright anti-Semitism, and hosting people on his show, very popular show, that are coming out with stuff that is just wrong. For instance, the historian Darren Wilson, Daryl Cooper, yeah, who's basically making the point that the real villain of the Second World War is not Winston, not Adolf Hitler, but Winston Churchill, and stuff like this, that in fact the concentration camps weren't really concentration camps. These poor Germans were just trying to keep people safe, but they ran out of food. They ran out of food because the Allies were bombing the railways. I mean, this stuff is so deeply offensive and troubling, but it's coming from someone who was taken very seriously. I say was. I think he still has influence. I think he's beyond the pale. But I don't even want to talk about Candace.
Let me get you on a point there, and I'm going to jump in because I'm also not a political philosopher, but I am completely willing to annoy people by trying to be. I think, the important part, at least to me, about this kind of woke development and the woke right, this thing is that they are adopting the kind of strategies and tactics and also some of the kind of most harmful ideas that used to be only kind of attributed to the far left, to the kind of postmodern neo-Marxist left. And I think the most, you pointed to Tucker Carlson's interview with Daryl Cooper, and why that's so troubling, I think, and it should be so troubling to people on the right, is that generally the kind of accepted version, one of the axiomatic beliefs of the right is this idea of the kind of the Thomasile constrained vision of humanity, that in fact humans are both good and bad, and they're capable of great good but also capable of great evil. It's the old Solzhenitsyn idea that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. And so there is in fact, no kind of perfect human. And that has an influence on the way that you see history, because if no one is ever perfect, then we should revere the people who were wise in their time. So that's why, someone like Winston Churchill, we can elevate him above his obvious flaws, because there is no perfect human being. There's only the people who are trying their best attempt, right? And it seems as though, and this links us back to a point that James was making last week, is that this work right stuff, one of the most insidious things that they're doing is adopting the kind of utopianism from the progressive, the far left, and saying no. In fact, perfection is entirely achievable, and if you weren't perfect, subject to my interpretation of perfection in the modern day, then you must be vilified as well. And so I think that that's one of the more troubling things, because it really is. If we continue down this path, then conservatives are really abandoning one of their core axioms, that we cannot be perfect ever, and we should do our best to enable the good angels of people's natures and try our best to constrain their worst excesses. But James, I'll hand it over to you.
Can I make a quick comment before we go to James? I mean, it does seem, I've had conversations with friends who I think are on that more woke right side. Their attitude seems to be that what they're doing is reacting to your what they'll say to me is, your classical liberal ideas, look what has got us. We are now living in a country where there are boys playing in girls' sports, where we have trillions of dollars of debt, where there are bureaucrats who are shutting down society and forcing you to take a vaccine. This is what your classical liberal ideas have wrought. It's all nonsense that all needs to be torn down and starting again. And I think I'm kind of agreeing with you there. What I want to say to them is, there are problems there, and I don't like all that stuff. You're also ignoring all the good that we're living through. Look around you at the marvels that we live. We live in the most prosperous, most fantastic time on earth ever. And I really am disturbed by the way that they're so willing to tear down the obvious benefits that we enjoy thanks to the Enlightenment ideas and our classical liberal values. So, sorry, that's just what I want to say.
James?
Yeah, I just want to say, I watched some of that Daryl Cooper interview on Tucker Carlson, and what he was saying was very objectionable, but it's sort of, there's a danger also to not ever test your arguments. And so he said things, the controversial point he made on that show and which I think was actually very objectionable, was that, when the Wehrmacht went into the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, suddenly they had all these Soviet prisoners of war, and there was no food for them and they starved, but it wasn't really their fault because, it was just a sort of bad luck, But I haven't read deeply into this, but I had read on the topic recently, and when Hitler sent his troops into the Soviet Union, it was a war of annihilation. Obviously against the Jews, because that's when the Holocaust starts, but also against the Slavs. And there were 2 million people who were deliberately starved to death by the Nazis in Soviet prisoners of war camps, to the degree that they ended up eating each other. So I think what Daryl Cooper was saying was flawed, wrong, and deeply morally objectionable to absolve. The Nazis were absolutely convinced that that they just had to push over the Soviet Union and it would collapse. So this idea that they captured sort of 2 million Soviet soldiers by accident is just not true. But the interesting thing was, so as I said, I think what he was saying is wrong and obviously quite obnoxious to absolve Hitler of those 2 million deaths for which he is clearly responsible. And they're the most horrific deaths imaginable, starving people to death. But then in the reaction, people didn't even, many people pushing back at him didn't even know he was talking about the Soviet POWs. And it's I think quite easy to make the argument that Hitler was a very evil person, and he was a killer. I mean, it wasn't just the Jews he tried to kill. It was the first people to be gassed in Germany were the disabled people, mentally disabled people. People in the insane asylums, they went into. That's where the gas chamber technology was first developed. Was to kill off those vulnerable people. When they went into Poland, there was a plan to murder the Polish intelligentsia, also on the Soviet side with the Kassenwitz massacre, but the Nazis had a plan of decapitating Polish society by literally murdering the Polish elite. The Holocaust, I think everyone that's front of center in people's minds. At the end of the war, according to the great German historians, Sebastian Hefner, Hitler was actually trying to engineer the deaths of the German people as well. So I think it's one should sort of also be able to sort of counter these arguments. And if you don't practice them, if you just sort of so one must be, I think, be in a position to stand up and say no for this and this reason. Churchill was not the villain of World War II, and just remember that the Allies had cracked the Nazi code, so they were hearing from the start of the war what the German Einsatzgruppen were doing, first against the Poles, and then later against the Jews and other enemies in Operation Barbarossa. So it was sort of, obviously it's objectionable what is being said, but also the merit-based sort of reaction should also be stronger. One doesn't have to say, look, you shouldn't have brought this guy on the show. You can say, well, for X, Y, and Z reason, this is why he was wrong. And
I think Andrew Roberts has done that.
That's how you sort of knock the thing on the head.
Douglas Murray too.
I think serious historians like Andrew Roberts have done that, which is good.
If I just want to add one point to James's, just taking a step back from this for a moment, what I and speaking as a white man, and as a political philosopher. Just to say that the what I see here in what you could describe or define as being a woke right reaction, I get the feeling that there's a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of contempt toward people that claim to be conservatives that weren't really. And what is happening subsequently is that you've got a reactionary force to the right of what was always standard British conservatism that's coming up and going, well, you know what, you guys betrayed us. So I don't know if it's as much of a reaction to the woke left. What I see, certainly that, well, I think there is, but I also see there being such a dissatisfaction with how conservatism has mutated in the UK that it's no longer acceptable. And now these are the things that we're going to believe in, and so on. That's just my.
I think this is it's probably been around longer than we think. I think the invasion of Iraq, the handling of the financial crisis, these things that happened under Republicans has sullied this, like in the UK, supposedly conservative ideas, and is causing this as part of a backlash. And we shouldn't dismiss their concerns. I think we should just be worried about the direction that they want to go in. For the longest time, there was always a sort of dichotomy in US on the left and the right in how the United States should portray itself abroad, how it should get involved abroad. For the left, there was always a reluctance to have the US involved in anything overseas because the country was just not good enough for the world. Like we were the fault, we were the cause of all the ill in the world, and the world was too good for us. On the right, it was the opposite. It was that we're too good. The kind of Buchananite people didn't want to get involved. We're too good for them. And now it seems like for the woke right, they seem to be, in a way, buying into this old leftist view that the United States is just not good enough for the world.
We're going to stay on this theme of some of the more important, say, areas under attack by the woke left and the woke right. And the most important one is free speech. And Simon, we are, both of us, sitting in fact, Richard as well today, we're all sitting in the UK, the home of the liberal tradition of free speech, and now also the home of the reverse of the liberal tradition of free speech. So, can you tell us about what the most recent story around free speech in the UK has been?
Sure. So the story of Graham Linehan is actually the story of everyone, because as it relates to freedom of speech in the UK, every story is actually the same story. Now, Graham Linehan, for context, is an Irish writer and a very successful one. And from his hand have come the sort of normie sitcom Father Ted, Black Books, the IT Crowd. I think the IT Crowd was the longest running, but Father Ted was the most successful. And it wasn't the dark, edgy stuff. This was your family sitting in front of the television giggling type humor, and very, very successful. But at some point in the last decade, Graham Linehan decided to try his hand at gender identity politics, siding with feminists who he felt were being stripped or having hard-won rights threatened. And he felt that this threat was emerging from the online subversive right. So he became quite an active social media personality, attacking profiles that he believed responsible for these threats. But he quickly discovered that it actually wasn't the online right, and that the threats were coming from the big lobbyist organizations, their media and their legal supporters. And chief amongst these is the organization Stonewall, which is named after the eponymous US riots, and was always a very strong lesbian, gay, and bisexual activist group. But At some point, they repurposed and parachuted the T in there and prioritized transgender activism as a result. And I don't want to turn this into some culture war, but this is actually what happened. This is documented. And what Graham Linehan discovered was almost the poster child for Antonio Gramsci's Long March Through the Institutions, because if you talk about capture, then Stonewall was in the BBC, the police, the councils, the government, the government departments, and he had even gone into corporations. That's how deep it was by the time he started getting involved. They sniffed that he was picking up what they were doing in these institutions and organizations, and they turned their guns on him. And he lost everything. He lost all his writing work. He lost all his media support. He was memory holed in his favorite, people who had written fabulously about all of his sitcoms. And his marriage collapsed. So he, to his credit, he did continue his activism, and he sort of started attacking the transgender lobby, as it were. And there's also an organization called Mermaids, which is run by a woman who sent her child for a sex change in Thailand. Okay, I'm just talking facts here. All right. It was subsequently what happened during these encounters is that Graham Linehan would get into an argument with an activist, and the activist would phone the police, and he would be arrested. And this happened on a number of occasions. He is due to be in court last week for one such police encounter. One of the activists made a complaint. It went to the Westminster High Court. He left Arizona on Sunday or Monday. He arrived at Heathrow Airport, and there were 5 armed coppers waiting for him. Now, okay, it is the airport, but the police in the UK are unarmed. And this has exploded, but it also exploded in a week where, as I said before, Angela Rayner resigned and so on. So I don't have much hope for where this is going to go. We're in a very bizarre situation as it relates to free speech. On more than 2 occasions, Keir Starmer has been in the company of either J.D. Vance or Donald Trump and has been questioned about freedom of speech, and he's given exactly the same answer on both occasions, which is, we've had freedom of speech for a long time in the United Kingdom, and I'm very proud of it. Okay, it's just ridiculous. He came out and he said he'd rather see the police doing actual work. Nothing has been done about this, and it's just going to be more of the same in future. Now, where does the problem lie? Okay, there are a number of areas. We've come out of we're still actually emerging from a massively hyped cancellation environment, whereby some views were considered haram and other views were considered acceptable. That is a practice that was rampant in the media, especially on the sort of left media side. But there's also the police. Look, I'm telling you what was written in the newspaper yesterday, and what I've heard from police myself, is that the chief commissioner is a guy called Sir Mark Rowley. And he doesn't appear to understand what's going on. So he's following the law, he claims, when his officers arrest, and where when other commissioners' officers arrest people for making comments on social media, whether they be interpreted with a racist dimension or a transphobic or a homophobic dimension. But Mark Rowley is at the centre, because the Met Police is the biggest in the UK, and all the other commissioners seem to follow him. And he does not appear to possess a discretionary judgment faculty, which means that if you, for example, the tweets that got Graham Linehan arrested at Heathrow, one of them was punch someone in the balls. Okay, it's not, you're not telling someone to go out and literally do that. It's just a statement, and you should apply just discretionary judgment to that statement that would say, actually, this is just banter. But it's gone out of control. I don't see us being able to rein this in. on the political side. We've had 14 years of Conservatives who were gifted ample opportunities to put a stake in the ground and go, don't be silly. This is not a threat. This is not a crime. Allow people to say what they want. One of the most interesting things, Gabriel, for me in the last week, since Graham Linehan's arrest, is the political response to it. You've got you've got a number of parties in Parliament. Okay, who are the guys that are not objecting to a writer being arrested? There are two parties in particular, and this is to me is pretty shocking. The one is the Liberal Democrats, okay, which is Ed Davey's party. They are meant to be the inheritors of the great liberal traditions. They are meant to be sensible. They are meant to be centrist. They are meant to be possessed with good judgment. Their chief executive, about 4 months ago, had to write to the party membership to tell the party to stop attacking gender-critical activists like J.K. Rowling, like Helen Joyce, like Catherine Bergstock, or any of the feminists, many of whom are lesbians, who've been standing up to for women's rights on the basis that they feel threatened by the transgender axis. So the Liberal Democrats are gone here, okay? The Green Party, which, as I spoke to you earlier, Zach Polanski, elected leader last week, goes on to BBC Newsnight. They asked him, what do you think about Graham Linehan being arrested for making some remarks on social media? His first statement is, yes, he should be arrested, and solidarity with trans people. We're not going to be able to incorporate a reasonable analysis where we should be as the country of Magna Carta with these sorts of people hanging around. So I'm afraid I don't care what Keir Starmer says, or the facts are very plain. This is a crisis. Donald Trump is right. J.D. Vance is right. Those comments might have offended a huge number of people at the Munich Security Conference, but he is not wrong. And yeah, we've had a week in which to think about this. I think Graham Linehan has gone back to Arizona where I said that he lives. And we're just waiting for the next person to get rumbled by 7 cops for saying something on social media. It's not going away. This is here to stay until such point is that political initiative comes out and said this is all wrong. We need to have a conversation as a country. And I think you and I had a discussion a few days ago, Gabriel, in which you talked about Supreme Court justice. Maybe you want to go into that a bit, because I think that's pretty profound.
Let's first go to James.
Yeah, I obviously the arrest was the shocking thing, but I just note that there was his court case where he and a so-called trans woman had been in an exchange, so i.e. a male who self-identified as a woman. And the sort of reports I saw just described this so-called trans woman as a she. And unless you sort of read into the sort of ideology and the language, it makes the report completely, to an outsider who's not sort of, been initiated into this, totally incomprehensible. You don't actually, it's you don't know, you sort of totally, it's just completely sort of nonsensical. You don't know who's who.
Exactly. I mean, that's a byproduct of this entire thing. Nothing makes sense.
Yes, I'm just saying that if you have newspapers are too terrified to describe people accurately, that in a way seems sort of, everyone can see that it's bad to arrest a writer at an airport and it's a big controversy, but it's sort of gone so far that you can't write accurately about certain stories and certain people, and that I think must reflect a sort of pervasive fear that if you get the so-called misgender someone, which is a sort of inversion of the English language again, you're going to have to pay serious consequences, like I suppose Graham Linehan has done for the past 10 years. So that seems to me sort of below the radar, but in a way perhaps more indicative of how bad the situation is.
Completely.
Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, every time I leave the United Kingdom and go back to the United States, you do feel the sort of sense of relief that we do have a First Amendment. And I'm a bit of a free speech fundamentalist here. What I find so extraordinary about someone like this guy Polanski from the Green Party cheering this on, is does he not understand that maybe politics will change? Maybe there'll be a different government that will decide that his extreme green ideology harms the poor and is very anti-human, and that maybe he should be put in jail for saying things online or in person that are, very anti-human or anti-progress. I find just the short-sightedness, the inability of people to actually stop thinking about their own rights in a different future is just amazing to me. And the other point is that writers like Jonathan Rauch, and I meant to mention him on our earlier discussion on the work right. Jonathan Rauch has written thoughtfully on the rise of the work right for the Institute for Humane Studies, if anybody wants to look at that. But he's written very powerfully about how free speech and allowing people to express themselves, it helps. People want to protect the poor, those, not the poor, but the minority classes, those people who they rather patronizingly think need to be protected from ideas. And they want to use the force of government to do that. But it's precisely because of free speech that people like Jonathan Rauch himself and Andrew Sullivan won the argument on gay marriage. They used free speech to convince people, used arguments, used your words to win people over. And, that's a far more civilized way of behaving. So this idea that the idea that you're protecting trans people by stopping expression, I think, is deeply, profoundly flawed. Anyway,
insulting to you. And just before Gabriel, I can wrap this back to Keir Starmer as well. I think this is a really stupid battle. I think it's an easy victory actually for a prime minister who's fighting fires on multiple fronts. He doesn't have to go through this. He doesn't have to. Because what is stopping a scenario where you get a whole bunch of pro-Palestinian boomers, and they come around to the idea, because now they're prescribed, Palestine Action is by law a terrorist group, they come around to a bunch of flag wavers, UK flag wavers, and saying, you know what, we're kind of in the same boat. I hate you, but I'm prepared temporarily to work with you because we're both getting arrested. My enemy's enemy is my friend. Logic, okay? That's not beyond the realms of possibility as far as I'm concerned. And to an extent, it's happened when they arrested a whole bunch of pro-Palestinian boomers earlier this year. A lot of the guys on the right came out and said, you shouldn't be doing this. But this was before Palestine Action was prescribed. So at the risk of something like that happening, where you've just got a collective that are prepared to tolerate each other for a certain amount of time over a single issue, in the objective of defeating a government's authoritarian attitude to these things, it's much easier for Keir Starmer to come out, to gather up to get his chief whips into action and to say, we've got to stop this. We've got to stop Mark Rowley and other people leaders of public life behaving like that. That's my thought. Gabriel.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's an easy win that Keir Starmer is leaving on the table, and especially at a desperate time for him. And I know we're pushing quite late into it, but I'm hoping that maybe we can squeeze this last topic in because I think it's so fascinating and so important, especially for South Africans to understand, because there is an energy revolution that's slowly underway in the United States. And Richard, I think you're one of the people at the vanguard of that revolution. Can you explain to us what is going on with Trump and the EPA and the endangerment finding in as brief a time as you can manage, given that we've run a little bit over?
Yes, and I apologize to our listeners for rabbiting on. So the endangerment finding. The endangerment finding it comes out of a 2007 Supreme Court ruling, Massachusetts v. EPA, and anybody wants to look it up. in which the Supreme Court in a 5-4 majority ruled that the government could regulate greenhouse gases, so particularly carbon dioxide, but other greenhouse gases, under the authority of the Clean Air Act, which was passed in the 70s to control pollutants like CO2, like sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide, and so harmful, and particulates. So it could use the Clean Air Act to control greenhouse gases. And what that did, this is during the Obama administration, is it opened the way for a huge amount of climate change regulation. So Obama pushes through the Clean Power Plan. Biden afterwards puts this on steroids and adopts a all-of-government approach to climate change, so that you have, for instance, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is supposed to govern basically the accounts, the finances of listed companies, requiring all companies to start measuring their climate impacts. And I've spoken to accountants who just find this completely inconceivable. That this stuff, there's no way of measuring this stuff. You're asking an accountant who deals in dollars and cents to start measuring something that's unmeasurable. So this is a huge expansion of government power, and Trump comes in, and in the first Trump administration, he vowed to get rid of it and didn't, and now they've actually done it. So the new EPA administrator, Zeldin, has come out and said they are not going to implement they're not going to abide by the endangerment finding. They're undoing it, and in so doing, they will save about $1 trillion in costs to businesses and households. That's how much this was costing our economy. What's happened at the same time, the Department of Energy, and I should say that I have my problems with the Trump administration, particularly its growing corporatism, its trade policies. But on energy, it's outstanding and has proven to be. Energy is the foundation of any modern economy, and in its energy policies, it is helping grow the economy. If there is any economic growth, it's coming out of this. Out of its changes to energy policy. And it's come out with a new report that's written by several very eminent climate scientists, Steve Koonin, who was actually in the Obama administration, Judith Curry, Ross McKittrick. And what they're finding is that the CO2 models that were relied upon to convince the Supreme Court to rule in the endangerment finding were greatly exaggerating. They were far too sensitive, and they were creating these extreme scenarios and exaggerating the harms of future warming. That there was in the United States, no long-term trend in floods or extreme weather events. That the natural variabilities in our climate are just far too complex for us to kind of disentangle human contributions to climate change. And they also make the point that carbon dioxide, this thing that we're breathing in and out, is essential to human life and is essential to a greening planet and to particularly to agriculture. We're growing. The planet is greening thanks to increased levels of CO2, and it's easier to grow crops. This is a good thing. So what they would do is completely underestimate any potential benefits from CO2. So what's happened now is because the EPA has withdrawn the endangerment finding, it is now being sued by the Environmental Defense Fund and by the Union of Concerned Scientists. And their case is that the EPA has not gone through the proper regulatory process and hasn't gone through proper sort of scientific findings. I think they're wrong on that. But there hasn't been a transparent process to get rid of the endangerment finding. So this will go back eventually to the Supreme Court, and there'll be another ruling. And I'm hoping, and I think I'm pretty confident now, that the Supreme Court now, compared to 2007, is more conservative. It has justices on it that are more inclined to rein in the power of the executive, of the bureaucrats to rule our lives, and restore power to Congress. That's where these laws should be coming from. If you wanted to start regulating greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act, you should go back to Congress and have them amend the Clean Air Act. That's the proper process. You don't use the courts to get through the legal process what you can't get through the political process. So this it's kind of an exciting time for those of us who are pro-energy, who think that hydrocarbons are a net benefit to us all. And it's thanks to hydrocarbons that we're able to do this, speak to each other, even though we're thousands of miles apart. Well, not quite. But so this is exciting. It's also kind of part of the vibe shift in what's happening. The New York Times last weekend ran a long story all about how downhearted, down at the mouth the climate activists are. One of them was quoted as saying, "Everything that I have worked on my entire professional life has gone down the toilet in the last 6 months." So it's kind of fascinating to see this pro-energy agenda, and our Secretary of the Energy, who Chris Wright, who is if you should look at his when he was an oil executive, because the company was called Liberty Energy, and he would put out every year a statement on a social impact statement, and his arguments of why hydrocarbons are good for the environment and help humanity is a masterpiece. I'll just say one last thing. So this endangerment finding came in under the Obama administration, Obama pushing it heavily, making the case, among other things, that increased CO2 and climate change would lead to rising sea levels. And what you see is what's a very strange thing that Mr. Obama did as soon as he left office was he bought, I think it cost $12 million, he bought a compound on Martha's Vineyard right on the coast. And either Obama has $12 million to burn and doesn't mind the fact that he's got this new beautiful compound and that the sea is going to lap up into his living room, and he doesn't care about the cost, or he never believed it in the beginning. And he knew that we were going to have catastrophic climate change and rising sea levels. And this was all a way of him getting control of the economy. You control energy, you control the economy. And I think the latter. I'll shut up there.
James? James, I think you're muted.
Yeah, just a very quick add-on point is that one of the things that's changed is just the context, in the sense that while the West was sort of thinking it could save the planet by starving itself of energy and killing off economic growth, China powered ahead with burning huge amounts of cheap coal to power their economy, not only their economy but their rise to almost greater power than the West. I think that's also changed the context in which people have to view energy policy.
Right.
It's not up to the West anymore. It actually doesn't make much difference what the West does if China or India later on does its own thing. In which case, this is all a lot of pain, a lot of suffering for no benefit whatsoever to anybody.
And I think it's important this point that we should be trying to unleash energy as much as possible, because it powers our ability to do things. Because especially in South Africa, where we've got the kind of debate around the Climate Change Act happening, and with more heavy-handed regulation of our use of hydrocarbons, when we haven't even fully developed our, the mining and the use of hydrocarbons in South African society. We are literally sitting on major oil finds and major gas finds that could power an energy revolution in the country. And also, given that we're burning incredibly dirty coal, if we just were to move to gas, we would not only have an energy revolution, but we would also start to bring down the amount of CO2 that we're putting out, because we'd be burning a cleaner source of energy in the form of gas. Right. But instead of that, we're kind of trying to skip through the initial, like the kind of the various points of development and go straight into the magical utopia in which Northern Cape solar panels will power the whole country.
Yeah, it's mad. It's immoral to not use them, and it's I don't know why. You seem to be virtuous if you hamstring your own economy and keep people in poverty. Well, it's not. It's immoral. I will say your latest point is excellent. The United States, even though we've grown our economy enormously, we've actually reduced our CO2 emissions, and we've done that through fracking, through the use of the transition to natural gas from coal. And that's all done not because of grand plans from the Obama or Biden administrations, but it's through entrepreneurs like Chris Wright, our current energy secretary, pursuing his own self-interest in an Adam Smith way and figuring out technology to give us a better, cleaner, cheaper energy that's reliable.
Yeah, and you can't really ask for much more from your energy infrastructure. So I think, thank you so much, Richard. That feels like a great place for us to leave it. And my apologies to the ladies and gentlemen. It seems as though Peter Mandelson has already heard about what we're doing, and he is interfering with Simon's connection to us, which is why he keeps dropping in and out.
No. I'm cool with Mandelson. It's the other guys. It's the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
And he's seemed to have muted Simon's mic as well. There is no end to the evil of the master of the dark arts. But thank you, Simon. We can't hear you. Peter Mandelson has you trapped in a glass box. I apologize. But thank you to our esteemed panel for your contributions today. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it to the end with us. And tune back in next week to catch another episode of South Africa's Best News Podcast. I'm Gabriel Makin, and this has been Makin Sense.
Thank you.